Hey everyone, welcome back to another couple of chapters of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We're going to be reading chapters 21 and 22 today. And the first chapter, so chapter 21, is called Goodbye Violet. This gum, Mr. Wonka went on, is my latest, my greatest, my most fascinating invention. It's a chewing gum meal. It's that tiny little strip of gum lying there is a whole 3-course dinner, all by itself. What sort of nonsense is this? One of the fathers said. My dear sir, cried Mr. Wonka, when I start selling this gum in the shops, it will change everything. It will be the end of all kitchens and all cooking. There will be no more shopping to do, no more buying of meat and groceries. There'll be no knives, forks at meal times, no plates, no washing up, no rubbish, no mess. Just a little strip of Wonka's magic chewing gum, and that's all you'll ever need at breakfast, lunch and supper. This piece of gum I've just made happens to be tomato soup, roast beef and blueberry pie, but you can have almost anything you want. What do you mean it's tomato soup, roast beef and blueberry pie, said Violet Bigard. If you were to start chewing it, said Mr. Wonka, then that is exactly what you would get on the menu. It's absolutely amazing. You can actually feel the food going down your throat and into your tummy. And you can taste it perfectly, and it fills you up. It satisfies you. It's terrific. It's utterly impossible, said Veruca Salt. Just so long as it's gum, shouted Violet Bigard. Just so long as it's a piece of gum I can chew it, and then that's for me. And quickly she took her own world record piece of chewing gum out of her mouth and stuck it behind her left ear. Come on, Mr. Wonka, she said. Hand over this magic gum of yours and we'll see if the thing works. Now, Violet, said Mrs. Bigard, her mother, let's not do anything stupid. Violet. I want that gum, Violet said obstinately. What's so silly? I would rather you didn't take it, Mr. Wonka told her gently. You see, I haven't got it quite right yet. There are still 1 or 2 things. Oh, to blazes with that, said Violet. And suddenly, before Mr. Wonka could stop her, she shot out a fat hand and grabbed the stick of gum out of the little drawer and popped it into her mouth. At once, her huge, well-trained jaws started chewing away on it like a pair of tongs. Don't, said Mr. Wonka. Fabulous, shouted Violet. It's tomato soup. It's hot, creamy and delicious. I can feel it running down my throat. Stop, said Mr. Wonka. The gum isn't ready yet. It's not right. Of course it's right, said Violet. It's working beautifully. Oh my, what lovely soup this is. Spit it out, said Mr. Wonka. It's changing, shouted Violet, chewing and grinding both at the same time. The second course is coming up. It's roast beef. It's tender and juicy. Oh boy, what a marvellous flavour. The baked potato is marvellous too. It's got a crispy skin and it's filled with butter inside. But how interesting, Violet, said Mrs. Bigard. You are a clever girl. Keep chewing, baby, said Mr. Bigard. Keep right on chewing. This is a great day for the Bigards. Our little girl is the first person in the world to have a chewing gum meal. Everyone was watching Violet Bigard as she stood there chewing the extraordinary gum. Little Charlie Bucket was staring at her, absolutely spellbound, watching her huge rubbery lips as they pressed and unpressed with the chewing. And Grandpa Joe stood beside him, gaping at the girl. Mr. Wonka was wriggling his hands and saying, No, 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 it's not ready for eating. It isn't right, you mustn't do it. Blueberry pie and cream, shouted Violet. Here it comes. Oh my, it's perfect. It's beautiful. It's exactly as though I'm swallowing it. It's as though I'm chewing and swallowing great big spoonfuls of marvellous blueberry pie in the world. Good heavens, shrieked Mrs. Bigard, suddenly staring at Violet. What's happening to your nose? Oh, be quiet, Mother, and let me finish, said Violet. It's turning blue, screamed Mrs. Bogard. Your nose is turning blue as a blueberry. Your mother is right, shouted Mr. Bogard. Your whole nose has gone purple. What do you mean? Said Violet, still chewing away. Your cheeks, screamed Mrs. Bogard. They're turning blue as well. So is your chin. Your whole face is turning blue. Spit that gum out at once, ordered Mr. Bogard. Mercy save us, yelled Mrs. Bogard. The girl's going blue and purple all over. Even her hair is changing colour. Violet, you're turning violet, Violet. What is happening to you? I told you I hadn't got it quite right, said Mr. Wonka, shaking his head sadly. I'll say you haven't, said Mrs. Bogard. Just look at the girl now. Everyone was staring at Violet, and what was a terrible, peculiar sight she was. Her face and hands and legs and neck, in fact the skin all over her body as well as her great big mop of curly hair, had turned a brilliant purplish blue, the colour of blueberry juice. It always goes wrong when we come to the dessert, sighed Mr. Wonka. It's the blueberry pie that does it. But I'll get it right one day, you wait and see. Violet, screamed Mrs. Bogard, you're swelling up. I feel sick, Violet said. You're swelling up, screamed Mrs. Bogard. I feel most peculiar, gasped Violet. I'm not surprised, said Mr. Bogard. Good heavens, girl, screeched Mrs. Bogard. You're blowing up like a balloon. Like a blueberry, said Mr. Wonka. Call a doctor, shouted Mr. Bogard. Prick her with a pin, said one of the other fathers. Save her, cried Mrs. Bogard, wringing her hands. And look at this funny picture. That's Violet. She's turned into a blueberry. But there was no saving her now. Her body was swelling up and changing shape at such a rate that within a minute it had turned into nothing less than an enormous round ball, a gigantic blueberry in fact, and all that remained of Violet Bogard herself was a tiny pair of legs and a tiny pair of arms sticking out of the great round fruit, and a little head on top. It always happens like that, said Mr. Wonka. I've tried it 20 times in the testing room on 20 Oompa Loompas, and every one of them finished up as a blueberry. It's most annoying. I just can't understand it. But I don't want a blueberry for a daughter, yelled Mrs. Bogard. Put her back to what she was this instant. Mr. Wonka clicked his fingers, and 10 Oompa Loompas appeared immediately at his side. Roll Mrs. Bogard into the boat, he said to them, and take her along the juicing room at once. The juicing room? Cried Mrs. Bogard. What are they going to do to her there? Squeeze her, said Mr. Wonka. We've got to squeeze the juice out of her immediately. After all, we'll just have to see how she comes out. But don't worry, my dear Mrs. Bogard. We'll get her repaired if that's the last thing we do. I'm sorry about it all. I really am. Already, the 10 Oompa Loompas were rolling the enormous blueberry across the floor on the inventing room towards the door that led to the chocolate river, where the boat was waiting. Mr. and Mrs. Bogard hurried after them. The rest of the party, including little Charlie Bucket and Grandpa Joe, stood absolutely still and watched them go. Listen, whispered Charlie. Listen, Grandpa. The Oompa Loompas in the boat outside are starting to sing. The voices, 100 of them, singing together, came loud and clear into the room. Dear friends, we surely all agree there's almost nothing worse to see than some repulsive little bum who's always chewing gum. It's very near as bad as those who sit around and pick their nose, so please believe us when we say that chewing gum will never pay. This sticky habit's bound to send the chewer to a sticky end. Did any of you ever know a person called Mrs. Bigelow? This dreadful woman saw no wrong in chewing all day long. She chewed while bathing in the tub. She chewed while dancing at her club. She chewed in church and chewed on a bus. It really was quite ludicrous. And when she couldn't find her gum, she'd chew up the linoleum, or anything that happened near, a pair of boots, the postman's ear, or other people's underclothes. And once she chewed her boyfriend's nose, she went on chewing till at last her chewing muscles grew so vast that from her face her giant chin stuck out like a violin. For years and years she chewed away, consuming 50 bits a day, until one summer's eve, alas, a horrid business came to pass. Miss Bigelow went late to bed. For half an hour she lay and read, chewing and chewing all the while, like some great clockwork crocodile. At last she put her gum away upon a special little tray, and settled back and went to sleep. She managed this by counting sheep. But now how strange, although she slept, those massive jaws of hers still kept on chewing through the night, even with nothing there to bite. They were, you see, in such a groove, they positively had to move, and very grim it was to hear, in pitchy darkness loud and clear, this sleeping woman's great big trap, opening and shutting, snap, 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 faster and faster, chop, chop, chop. The noise went on, and it wouldn't stop, until at last her jaws decide to pause and open extra wide, and with the most tremendous chew, they bit the lady's tongue in two. Thereafter, just from chewing gum, Miss Bigelow was always dumb, and spent her life shut up in some disgusting sanatorium. And this is why we'll try so hard to save Miss Violet Brigard from suffering an equal fate. She's still quite young, it's not too late, provided she survives the cure. We hope she does. We can't be sure. Chapter 22. Along the corridor. Well, 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 sighed Mr. Willy Wonka. 2 naughty little children gone. 3 good little children left. I think we'd better get out of this room quickly before we lose anyone else. But, Mr. Wonka, said Charlie anxiously, will Violet Brigard ever be all right, or will she always be a blueberry? They'll dejuice her in no time, declared Mr. Wonka. They'll roll her into the dejuicing machine, and she'll come out just as thin as a whistle. But will she still be blue all over? Asked Charlie. She'll be purple, cried Mr. Wonka. A fine rich purple from head to toe. But there you are. That's what comes from chewing disgusting gum all day long. If you think gum is so disgusting, said Mike TV, then why do you make it in your factory? I do wish you wouldn't mumble, said Mr. Wonka. Can't hear a word you're saying. Come on, off we go. Hurry up, follow me. And we're going into the corridors again. And so saying, Mr. Wonka scuttled across to the far end of the inventing room and went out through a small secret door hidden behind lots of pipes and stoves. The 3 remaining children, Veruca Salt, Mike TV, and Charlie Bucket, together with the 5 remaining grown-ups, followed after them. Charlie Bucket saw that they were now back in one of those long pink corridors with many other pink corridors leading out of it. Mr. Wonka was rushing along in front, turning left and right and left, and Grandpa Joe was saying, Keep a good hold of my hand, Charlie. It would be terrible to get lost in here. Mr. Wonka was saying, No time for any more messing about. We'll never get anywhere at the rate we've been going. And on he rushed down through the endless pink corridors. With this, his black top hat perched on top of his head, and his plum-coloured velvet coat-tails flying out behind him like a flag in the wind. They passed a door in... They passed a door in the wall. No time to go in, shouted Mr. Wonka. Press on, press on. They pressed another door, and then another and another. There were doors every 20 paces or so along the corridor now, and they all had something written on them. A strange clanking noise was coming from behind several of them, and delicious smells came wafting through the keyholes. And sometimes little jets of colour steam shot out from the cracks underneath. Grandpa Joe and Charlie were half running and half walking to keep up with Mr. Wonka, but they were able to read what it said on quite a few doors as they hurried by. Eatable marshmallow pillows, it said on one. Marshmallow pillows are terrific, shouted Mr. Wonka as he dashed by. They'll be all the range when I get them into the shops. No time to go in, though. No time to go in. Lickable wallpaper for nurseries, it said on the next door. Lovely stuff, lickable wallpaper, cried Mr. Wonka, rushing past. It has pictures of fruits on it. Bananas, apples, oranges, grapes, pineapple, strawberries and snozzberries. Snozzberries, said Mr. Mike TV. Don't interrupt, said Mr. Wonka. The wallpaper has pictures of all these fruits on it, and when you lick the picture of a banana, it tastes of a banana. When you lick a strawberry, it tastes of a strawberry. And when you lick a snozzberry, it tastes exactly like a snozzberry. But what does a snozzberry taste like? You're mumbling again, said Mr. Wonka. Speak louder next time. On we go. Hurry up. Hot ice cream for cold days, it said on the next door. Extremely useful in the winter, said Mr. Wonka, rushing on. Hot ice cream warms you up, no end in the freezing weather. I also make hot ice cubes for putting in hot drinks. Hot ice cubes make hot drinks hotter. Cows that give chocolate milk, it said on the next door. Ah, my pretty little cows, said Mr. Wonka. How I love those cows. But why can't we see them? Asked Veruca Salt. Why do we have to go rushing on past all these lovely rooms? We shall stop in time, called out Mr. Wonka. Don't be so madly impatient. Fizzy lifting drinks, it said on the next door. Oh, those are fabulous, cried Mr. Wonka. They fill you with bubbles, and the bubbles are full of a special kind of gas, and the gas is so terrifically lifting that it lifts you right off the ground, just like a balloon. And up you go until your head hits the ceiling, and there you stay. But how do you come down? Asked Charlie. You do a burp, of course, said Mr. Wonka. You do a great, big, long, rude burp, and up comes the gas, and down comes you. But don't drink it outdoors. There's no knowing how high up you could be carried if you do that. I gave some to an old Oompa Loompa once out in the backyard, and he went up and disappeared out of sight. It was very sad. I never saw him again. He should have burped, Charlie said. Of course he should have burped, said Mr. Wonka. I stood there shouting, Burp, you silly ass! Burp, or you'll never come down again! But he didn't, or couldn't, or wouldn't. I don't know which. Maybe he was too polite. He must be on the moon by now. On the next door it said, Square sweets that look round. Wait! Cried Mr. Wonka, skidding suddenly to a halt. I'm very proud of my square sweets that look round. Let's take a peek. And that's the end of those chapters. So, a few questions now. First one is, what flavour is Mr. Wonka's latest chewing gum? Is it tomato soup? Is it roast beef? Is it blueberry pie? Or is it all of the above? What was the flavour of the chewing gum? The flavour of the chewing gum was obviously all three, wasn't it? Because it was a 3-course meal chewing gum. Not sure if it would work in real life, but it's a good idea. Number 2. What does Violet morph into when she chews Mr. Wonka's gum? So what does she become when she's at it? Does she become a blueberry? Does she become a blue elephant, an Oompa Loompa, or does she become Mr. Wonka? What happens to Violet? She turns into a great big chunky blueberry, doesn't she? Because that's what's at the end of the dessert, isn't it? The blueberry pie. Well done. Okie dokie. Question 3. Where do the Oompa Loompas bring Violet after her transformation? Do they take her to the refrigerator, the juicing room, the infirmary, or the reversing room? So where do they take her to try and make her better? They take her to the juicing room, like you would with your other fruit. You juice them. Just looking at the wind. Ooh. What does Mr. Wonka repeatedly ask Mike not to do? Does he ask him not to mumble, not to ask questions, not to interrupt, or to not be doubtful? What does he say to him all the time? He tells him constantly not to mumble, but I think that's because he doesn't want to listen to his question. Last question for these chapters. How does one prevent oneself from floating upward forever after drinking a fizzy lifting drink? So what do you need to do to stop floating up after those silly fizzy drinks? thinking heavy thoughts, sucking on a lemon, drinking a sinking drink, or do they need to burp? What do they need to do to come back down? That's right, and I presume a few of you are probably laughing at home. They need to do a great big burp. But of course they're going to say excuse me at the end of it, because they've got lovely manners. Well, that's the end of those 2 chapters. And I'm going to read the other chapters in class now. Because next week it is half term, so there'll be nothing on the VLE next week. So the other chapters I'm going to read in class, and I'm going to ask some questions in class, so don't worry about the other chapters now, because I'm going to be asking those when the children are in class. Okay, hopefully see you soon. If not, keep me posted on the VLE. It'll be Mrs. Nichols posting some stuff after half term, but if you need to contact me for anything within the class or anything you're worried about, just drop me an email and I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. Okay, bye.